want to reflect firstly on the nature of public education and the fundamentals, because when we think about the road ahead, I think it's really critical to think about why we're here and what we value about public education. Now, we are at the 151 year mark. If we had have been speaking this time last year, we would have been celebrating 150 years of free, compulsory and secular education in the state of Victoria. And 151 is no less of a milestone, but it's important, I think, for us to think about the social contract that's inherent in those words and the provision of public education. Now, many of you will know, but social contract, this concept, originally came from the Greeks, and I think Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a French philosopher, kind of really coined the moniker, the term social contract, and first talked about what we mean. And it is this implicit contract between society and the state about the provision of particular services, and public education is one, where parents, carers, grandparents, others agree, I'm going to give over responsibility for my child to the state for a particular period of time under particular conditions, and in return, you will educate my child. Now, that is such a significant commitment to make. But we do so because we think it's the right thing to do by children. We think that is the best way to educate children. We think, and societies have done this throughout history, we've said, how are we going to nurture and grow and develop our community's children? Well, we're going to bring them together firstly, because we think there's something valuable about peer interactions. We think there's value in children being with peers of the same age. We also think that there's something inherently social about learning and development. We want those interactions to be interactions that support learning and development. But we're not going to just bring them together with anyone. In ancient times, we're going to bring them together with our elders, our most wise members of our communities. And now we're going to bring them together in the presence of our teachers, trained, qualified adults who we've said, these people have the skills and qualifications to raise this generation of children in partnership with parents. And we're going to make sure that they're in safe environments. And we've codified those expectations in various ways across time. Most recently in Victoria, we have our child safe standards, which say these are the 10 standards that all organisations working with children need to adhere to in order to ensure that as a society we're comfortable that our children are kept safe. Safe from abuse, safe from harm, and in the care of qualified, appropriate adults. The other part of that contract, though, is that parents agree, I'm going to send my child to school every day. I'm going to make sure that they're clothed and fed and well, and that I support their learning in the home. It's not something that we talk about often, this social contract that exists between parents and carers and schools. But I think it is important for us to reflect on, because even though it's codified in law, we have our Education Training Reform Act, we have the notion of free, compulsory secular, we even have things like fines if parents don't send their children to school. But very, very rarely do we rely on that legislation. Very rarely do we rely on those fines. What we rely on is the social contract. We rely on this explicit and implicit agreement between parents and carers and schools about all of the conditions under which we're going to operate to educate our children and young people. Now, the reason I'm focusing on this is because I think when we think about the future of public education and the road ahead, it is important to think about the fundamentals that underpin that social contract. And it is about bringing children together in the presence of qualified, trained adults for particular periods of time, under certain conditions, child safe standards, but also the curriculum we teach, the grouping of students, the qualifications that they receive at the end, and ensuring that we remain true to those fundamentals. Because my argument would be that when we think about the road ahead, as threatening as it can be at times and as frightening as it can be, but also as exciting as it can be, when we think about the potential of things like artificial intelligence, or if we think about the potential, what we saw during the COVID years, the potential for online and remote learning, fundamentally, those key tenets of public education and schooling are probably going to remain the same. So there might be a question for us about the role of AI, but I reckon it's a question of the role of the way AI can be used as a tool, complemented by qualified classroom teachers who know the curriculum, who know their students, who know their communities, and are trained to teach students well. Now, AI might be a really important tool to that, but I hope, and it's a personal hope as much as a professional one, I hope it never replaces the role of a qualified classroom teacher, because that relationship between the teacher, the student, the content that they're teaching, and the family and community around them, I think that is the fundamental underpinning of the social contract of public education. The second reason I wanted to raise it and really focus on the social contract is because I think it is at risk of being eroded at the moment. There was some of you may have seen this, there was an article published in The Guardian just a week ago now from the UK, and it reported on a study that was conducted by an organisation called Public First. Now, Public First, they're a really interesting organisation. They're effectively a market research focus group polling organisation. They're very, very closely linked to the Conservative Party in the UK. But they were commissioned by a group of charities to interview and conduct focus groups with parents about their experiences of schooling coming out of COVID-21. COVID-19, why did I say 21?
Because it was happening in 21.
That's right. Freudian. Now, what came out of that research was many parents and carers and families saying that the social contract that they felt that they had with their schools was being frayed and eroded. And the sense of obligation that they felt to send their child to school every day was much diminished. And it wasn't diminished just by the experiences during COVID-21. COVID-19, there are... Okay, I'm going to stick with this clearly. But it was eroded through the experience of a series of strikes that took place in UK schools. Now, I'm not arguing against the right to strike, in any sense, but what was reported from parents is they felt that if teachers felt it was okay to stop work and not attend school, and if their students missed out on school for a period of time, and that was coming on off the back of COVID-19, lockdowns, remote flexible learning, then hang on, this notion that every day matters, that I absolutely must send my child to school every single day because that continuity of learning is so important, well, if it's not so important, that for a health crisis or for an industrial crisis, we can suddenly just skip a few days, well, what does it matter really if I just skip a few days? What does it matter if I take those holidays outside of school holiday time? What does it matter if my child just doesn't feel like going to school that day? So you can see, and I don't think it's happening here to such an extent, but it is happening to some extent. And I think it's something that we really need to keep a close eye on. How do we nurture and re-establish and really care for what makes this social contract work between schools and families and communities and carers? Because I think if we don't, and I was thinking about this morning, how do I phrase this? It relates to a concept called the Matthew effect. So the Matthew effect is pretty well known in social policy and education in particular, and it refers to the Bible, the book of Matthew, and there's a phrase in there: "To he who hath, more shall be given." You know, and I think the translation is, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. In educational contexts, the Matthew effect works by the capacity of those with high social capital, lots of books in the home, music, access to arts and cultural experiences. Those families with more cultural assets tend to benefit more from education because they're much better equipped to engage with school, engage with all the things that schools can offer. Those with less, so less access to language, to literature, to arts, to travel, to clothing, to all the things that make school work, tend to be less able to benefit from from all that public schooling offers. And this is the thing I was struggling to express this morning. So I think the dark secret of everyday matters and the importance of sending your child to school every single day is that is more true for some families than it is for others. If you come from a much more affluent, advantaged community family, this is why I can say this on a Saturday, it probably doesn't matter that much if you skip the odd day here and there. You've got the social capital, the resources in your family, the conversation at the dinner table that will get you over that missed day of schooling, that missed week of schooling. If when you're away, you're off on a trip in Europe, you're probably going to get the benefits that you might not otherwise get in school. If you come from a much more disadvantaged family, if you don't have access to those same experiences inside the home, then that missed day, that missed week, it really, really, really matters. And I think is why the social contract is so important, that we preserve it, that we nurture it, that we really ensure that it is robust and can weather all of the pressure that is coming from COVID-19 and this potential erosion of the value of public schooling and the importance of attending every day, not because it matters equally to everyone, but because it matters so much more to our most vulnerable communities. So that puts a series of expectations on our schools. And it's the final thing I wanted to just reflect on this morning, that the nature of that social contract between parents and carers and schools has changed. Because what was previously offered and available within the wider community and within the home, for many students, and particularly for our most vulnerable students, is not on offer anymore. The access to those experiences, that nurturing, the availability of social and health and mental health services is not as available in our communities, particularly for our most vulnerable, as it once was. And increasingly, those services are expected to be delivered inside schools. And it's putting so much pressure on our schools and expectation on our teachers, on our school leaders, that if we don't match those expectations with resources and supports to meet those expectations, we risk further eroding that social contract. That if we're expecting schools to deliver not only the teaching and learning, but the well-being, the health, the mental health, the engagement, the interaction with services outside schools, all of those experiences, and we haven't matched those with appropriate resources inside schools to meet those commitments, then again, we're going to reinforce this feeling amongst parents and communities, well, what does it matter so much? If the school's not meeting its end of the bargain, and the state is not meeting its end of the bargain, then maybe I shouldn't meet my end of the bargain either. Now, that is, I think, when we think about the road ahead for public education, I think that's the greatest risk that we face at the moment, that the nature of the social contract is changing, and we don't change the system sufficiently with sufficient scale and pace to match the expectations. The positive, I think, is that Victoria is doing that. Now, coming out of COVID-19, but even before, we saw such change in the kind of services that are now offered in our schools compared to where we were 10, 20 years ago. We now have GPs in schools. We now have a mental health practitioner in every secondary school in the state and every specialist school with secondary age students. We have over $500 million invested in mental health supports through the Mental Health Fund and Menu, Mental Health in Primary Schools program, and partnerships with the mental health practitioners I mentioned before, partnerships with Headspace. That is a massive investment in the public education system that isn't available elsewhere. We have classes in schools, we have breakfast clubs, we have camp sports excursions, we have this range of investment that is now, I think, I won't claim that it's on pace, but it's almost keeping pace with the change of expectations. Where I think we need to do more is in the alignment of our teaching and learning workforces with those wider health and engagement workforces. The delivery of public schooling now is becoming much more about a team-based approach than it is about that direct relationship between the classroom teacher and the group of children and young people in their class. It's about a health and wellbeing and teaching and learning team all coming together around the needs of the learner. And I think, again, this is where Victoria has been leading the way. We are well advanced in terms of the models for interaction between professionals and the extent to which the planning is not just focused on assessment of learning and the pedagogy and the classroom practices, the curriculum programs that come in behind that, is much more focused when we think about individual learning plans, when we think about the disability inclusion profile, the extent to which that is then extending out to children with additional needs. We're much more focused on the whole child now than we ever were before. But we've got to ensure that the future investment matches that expectation. Now, I know if the former minister and the current minister were here, they would say that one of their priorities is advocating for 100% of school resourcing standard to come into Victorian government schools. Now, we're on track to meet the state's commitments. The Commonwealth have their end of the bargain. We're entering a negotiation period next year, so many of you will be aware. The NSRA, the National Schools Resourcing Agreement panel for a better and fairer schooling system, is about to deliver their report. And as we enter 2024, Victoria will go to the negotiating table with the Commonwealth to argue for a pathway for 100% of the resourcing standard. My argument this morning, and again I'll finish here just to open up the conversation, is that as we argue for that 100%, we should also be thinking about how we allocate that funding to a wider range of services, not just the teaching and learning, as important as that is, but if we only focus on the teaching workforce, we are going to be continuing to load up the pressure and expectation on that teaching workforce such that we drive the current workforce constraints that we're seeing at the moment, the current workforce shortages, where, frankly, for many, not all, but for many, teaching is just being perceived and school leadership is being perceived as too hard. Unless we use that resourcing to match the capability, the expertise with that wider health, wellbeing and engagement workforce to work alongside classroom teachers, we're just going to make the job too hard and we're not going to meet our end of the bargain on that social contract. So I think there's a lot to be positive about. Victoria, I think, particularly in our government schools, has really established the foundations, set the groundwork for those wider health and wellbeing workforces to come in and work alongside our classroom teachers. But we need to do more, and I think that needs to be the focus for our road ahead. How do we both hold in mind the fundamentals of what a free, compulsory secular education looks like in our government schools and the social contract inherent in that with parents and carers, and ensure that we're resourcing that contract to meet the demands of the future.